We are holding this event for the first year of the pandemic under the title of Nature, Human, and Our Future. We are continuing our series of symposiums. This is our 8th session, the penultimate one, with the session to be held in 7 p.m. with Turkish hour. This series of panel will have been completed, and the topic of the 7 p.m. session is what's to be done. Our session has the title Inequalities in Pandemic. We have Dr. Vicente Navarra and Dr. Onur Hamzaoğlu with us. Actually, Vicente was supposed to be the first speaker, but possibly he has a technical problem. That's why before him, we will be listening to Onur Hamzaoğlu. In this session, actually, if I am to share our objectives in general, or in other words, our learning objectives, we want to look at the effect of the already existing inequalities on COVID-19 pandemic, the principal results of neoliberalism regarding management of COVID-19 pandemic, and we will be discuss whether or not the pandemic created a demand as health for everyone, right to health for everyone. I'd like to introduce you Onur Hamzaoğlu. He was graduated from Gülhane Medical School from 1985. In 1991, he became a public health specialist and an epidemiologist and an associate professor in 1996. In 2002, he became a professor. Until the end of his office, he was the head of the department in Kocaeli University. He was a signatory to the "We will not be a party to this crime." He was dismissed from university. In 1996, with Nevzat Eren, he published a book titled Contagious Diseases in Turkey. And in 2016, he prepared the Human Industry and Humans Industry and Health in Kocaeli. And he is also a member of Kocaeli Solidarity Academy, abbreviated as CODA, and he's one of the editors of the Society and Health International Association for Health Policy Europe, a member of both, and Turkish Hematology Association, Public Health Specialist, and Social Sciences Association are some of the associations to which he is member. Inequality in health, class and health, industry's effect on health, poverty and health are some of his topics. Some of the awards he had received are as follows. In 2011, he received Nusret Fişek Public Health Award. Green Prophet gave the award of Eco Heroes of 2011. Egecep gave him a science award related to defense of the life, a research ethic award, and in 2015, Turkish Public Health Association and Oka University had given him the Public Health Award. Thank you very much, Özlem, to you and to all who contributed. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Newroz of all peoples of the world, the freedom fire of the ironsmith Kawa is guiding to all of us. And we are in such a day that an international convention, namely Istanbul Convention, had been abolished by a single person with the decision of president. This convention had been considered null and void. Recent 72 hours are going towards dark days, Dr. Gergerlioğlu stood trial for a tweet he had shared, and his parliament membership had been abolished, and they took a decision about giving a state guarantee for Kanal Istanbul, and another decision related to Gezi Park. Property of Gezi Park was taken from the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality and given to a completely unknown foundation. We can share many issues like this, and also custodies, closing HTP, and other steps. That's why we need the freedom of fire of Iron Smith Kava. For this presentation, I have drawn upon COVID-19 vaccination data, and I calculated some inequality indicators. That's why my presentation will be mostly based on images, and also among the texts, I will be sharing some photos. Most of them are children from one. Most of them had been forced to migration from small villages. They were dealing with livestock breeding, but then they had remained without any opportunity and means of maintenance. Yes. I will be speaking on inequalities in pandemic, reasons, and situation in Turkey. I have three main topics: concepts and the short history. I will be doing my best to concretize it as much as possible. And as a method, I want to discuss the crisis of life. Then, I will be looking at more visible inequalities in terms of pandemic, the studies related to disease and deaths, and finally, regional and provincial inequalities in vaccination. But before beginning, I'd like to share a quotation from Hegel, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He says, concepts cannot exist with the freedom of imagination and thought. They have flesh and bone in nature. In the concepts of humans, nature is reflected originally and dialectically, which is a very valuable point. So, we have to conceptualize the series of values which are related to the life rather than our minds. Equality. When we speak of equality, of course, we first remember Marx and Engels. In 1875, Marx published some side notes, actually wrote some side notes to the program of German Labour Party, and he discussed how to ensure and measure equality, discussing the party program. And he says, first of all, equality should be measured only with a single value, which should be labor. And after many discussions, he says, of course, a summary, equal pay for equal work is not an equality because it will develop and feed inequality. And 3 years after, in 1878, Friedrich Engels published his Anti-Dühring, and he has a wide discussion related to the history of equality. And he defined 4 groups of equalities. The last 2 of them are bourgeois equality and proletarian equality. Then, with many important texts, in 1986, Brian Turner published a work, Equity, and he discussed equality under 4 topics. One of them is existential equality, which is equality coming from being from the species of humans. Then freedom, equality of opportunities, which is called as modern equality or bourgeois equality, also known as equality of citizens. And equality in conditions is an equality in access and benefit, and equality in consequences, which means meeting the needs in all domains of life. Turner, in this work, defines 3 levels of equality: citizenship level and politics. And this is discussed, as you see. Citizenship defines an equality in legal level. Equality of conditions is a social equality based on access and benefits. And he concludes that equality in consequences can only happen in socialism, which has the content of equality in economy, production, and socialism in general. Within this scope, also drawing upon from Marx, if we are to define the equality, I think we can say that a social life where the subject of the life is humans and the objective of meeting needs of each and every individual. What we are trying to tell here, equality does not have a static content. On the contrary, it has a dynamic content. While the facilities and social beings develop, while the scientific knowledge enlarges, its content is also growing and enriching. So if we, of course, have the objective of the needs of each individual, equal pay for equal work will not pave the way for equality, just it will create more differences. To go into a historical process, before this, I'd like to share a text. I selected a less readable font because I don't want you to read and to tire you. I will be reading it. After human beings existed in the globe in almost 2 million or 3 million years, until the last 15,000 or 10,000 years, they didn't live. They haven't seen this concept. First, they were dependent on nature. They were, in essence, together, but everyone alone. Then the division of labor happened based on gender and then physiologic basis and age. They hunted together, they consumed together. With agriculture and livestock breeding, they learned how to transform the nature, and they were successful in being effective vis-a-vis the nature. They created surplus product. Then those who are not working came to the fore. The city, the police, the state. By time, they began to work for those who are not working without their will. They became slaves. They were empowered. They became poorer and poorer, and some became master. While they were slaves, they became the owners of what they produced and what they live. Humans got to know the mode of production of slaves. The knowledge increased, technology developed, but human beings, left. Then they got to know the feudal lords, they became serfs. Then they got to know the bourgeois, and they became proletarians. Each time, the surplus value and value production increased, social division of labor developed, accompanied by class and exploitation. In a nutshell, the humans knew and recognized inequality with class society, with the slave, feudal, and capitalist modes of production. Modern equality, or the equality of citizens for everyone, was born within the relations created by bourgeoisie within capitalism, because capitalism needed, in quotation, a free worker in order to exist. So the equal right is bourgeois law itself. Since it is in conflict with the raison d'etre of bourgeoisie, capitalism itself is an obstacle before social and economic equality. Equity can create the equality of sharing. Equity does not have the target of abolishing classes. Seeing this content, we have to be well aware of that. It is a concept which which is tried by bourgeoisie to replace equality. For an economic and social equality, the basic condition is the lack of exploitation. It is a society without classes. Equality only can exist within a mode of production where all classes are abolished. To speak on inequality in health, it is each and every one of the differences in the humans which are not coming from natural reasons. I have to emphasize this. Inequality in health is a result of social reasons, and we can define it as each and every differences between humans which cannot be explained with biomedical and behavioral factors related to situation of health, state of health, and life expectancy. So inequality in health is preventable because it's a result of social relations. So it is not acceptable. And the inequality is not among only humans or individuals. It is inequality among countries, social groups, and fundamentally classes. Methods, especially COVID-19 pandemic process will be discussed here under the topic of crisis of life. I'll be doing my best to discuss this with you. Of course, beginning, we have to remember the way from Perote to Wuhan. Perote was a small Mexican town and in the northern part of Mexico, very unknown, quite unknown by virtually everyone. There were 1 million pork farms in America, so 53 pig in each of the farm. But in 1980s, with the neoliberal capitalism, with the well-known economical grounds, nearly all of the pig farms had been transferred to Mexico. They had been rebuilt there in poor towns, and they created industrial pork farms. And we know that in 2009, there was a virus which is called H1N1. First, it was transmitted from pigs to humans, then from humans to other humans. But the Perote people only could know this, that the reason was their own pig farms, pig breeding farms. And Wuhan is the 7th biggest city of China and the 42nd of world, and around 230 international multinational companies have their production units there. Wuhan is a place where mostly foreign managers are working with people who are directly brought from the village to the factories, not the poor strata of the cities. So they could be called, well, the slaves of 21st century. They are staying and living in factories in 6 days out of 7 days, and they are going to their shifts from their dormitories just for a few dollars a week. All their life is in factories. This is a town, this is a city, one, and this was such a town, Perote. How we can discuss all this process, how we can look at it from a holistic perspective. These slides had been created to this end. Yes, the mode of society in which we are living is the patriarchal neoliberal capitalism. And we know that this mode of society has the problem of being irrational because capitalism lives structural crisis just because of its irrationality. One of them had been experienced in 1970s. In order to cope with this, under the hegemony of United States of America, World Bank and IMF, with the guidance of World Bank and IMF, so-called structural cohesion policies had been set, and the patriarchal neoliberal capitalism could sustain itself until 2007, and this neoliberalism had been settled in various countries with threats. The countries were divided into different groups and their living areas had been changed. And with 2007 crisis, which happened in capitalism, it was seen that this system, it was seen the results of this system. And in patriarchal neoliberal capitalism, we have seen that the plunder and destruction of nature became stronger and stronger, and neoliberalism had organized itself under the names of reforms in health, education, traffic, livestock, plants, energy system, urban system, etc. Many transformations happened as a result of this system, especially post 1970. Social state perspective had been completely excluded, and these had been transferred to private area. People began to make expenditures from their own pocket. And of course, life and work had been organized in order to increase the exploitation. So-called quality circles, total quality assurance discussions, flexible work are all topics of this working at home began to be discussed from all these times, and now we are living it. All these practices not only gave birth to structural crisis of capitalism, but also climate crisis, food crisis, crisis in the health and education systems. As a result of so-called reforms, life conditions of life worsened. Inequalities among countries and classes increased, and
Açık, ses şimdi açık ama YouTube'da değil, ortamda açık.
Aha, doğru.
Evet.
Ben mi açacağım?
Ona geçerken, yayına geçerken açalım diye ben size isterseniz hatırlatayım. Ben
Hayır,
kendimi kapatacağım.
ben şimdi kapatacağım yeri göremiyorum.
Evet. Ben de kendimkini açarken size de hatırlatmış olayım. Olur mu? Uygun olur mu?
Tabii.
Ona bu slaytı baştan almış olacaksınız değil mi? Çünkü bu slayttan yani başlarında gitti sanki biraz.
Tamam.
Görüntü geldi hocam. Hocam
Hocam buyurun lütfen.
Evet. Özür diliyoruz. Teknik bir arıza oldu. Arkadaşlarımız hızla gidermeye çalıştılar. Tekrar hepinize saygıyla selamlıyorum. Sanıyorum bu slaytta kaldık. Ben tedbir olsun diye yeniden ele alayım dilerseniz. Evet, içinde yaşadığımız toplum biçimi, patriarkal, neoliberal, kapitalist toplum biçimi ve akıl dışılığıyla malul, insana ve doğaya karşıtlığının yanı sıra ve bu akıl dışılığı nedeniyle de değişik periyotlarda hem küçük hem de yapısal krizler yaşadığını biliyoruz. Yapısal krizlerinden bir tanesi de 1970'li yıllarda yaşanmıştı ve bu sürecin kendi adına onarılabilmesi için Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nin hegemonyasında Dünya Bankası ve IMF'nin de katkılarıyla yapısal uyum politikaları belirlendi. Ve bu yapısal uyum politikaları kapsamında kapitalizm yeniden düzenlenip patriarkal kapitalizm diye adlandırıldı ve 80'li yıllar tüm dünyada bazı ülkeleri tehditle de olsa bu sistemi entegre etmeyle geçti ve dünya merkez ülkeler, çevre bağımlı kapitalist ülkeler olarak da görev paylaşımıyla birilerine merkeze sermaye aktaracak şekilde yapılanan bir hale geldi. Ve bu sistemde içinde yeni yaklaşım itibariyle doğanın talanı ve tahribatı tarihin en üst düzeyine çıktı. Şöyle söyleyebilirim, sanayi devriminden bu zamana geçen 260 yıllık süre içinde toplam emisyonun %52'sinin son 30 yılda yani 1990'dan itibaren 2020 yılına kadarki süreçte gerçekleştiği hesaplanmış durumda. 230 yıl içinde dünyada üretim alanında tüketime yönelik olarak karbondioksit emisyonunun %48'i, son 30 yılında ise toplamın %52'si gerçekleşmiş durumda. İşte bu son 30 yılın neoliberal kapitalizmle nasıl bir tahribat ve talan yarattığının bir ifadesi. Onun yanı sıra bütün alanların, bütün yaşam alanlarının, sistemlerin, işte sağlık sisteminin, eğitim sisteminin, ulaşım sisteminin, bitkisel tarımın, hayvansal tarımın, kent yaşamının, enerji üretim modellerinin ve sistemlerinin ve de tabii ki ekonominin patriarkal neoliberal kapitalizmin gereksinimleri bağlamında düzenlenmesi her yerde reform başlığında gerçekleştirilmeye çalıştı. Tabii ki en büyük şey de çalışma yaşamında sömürü oranının artırılmasına, örgütsüzleştirmeye yönelik gerçekleşti. İşte bütün bu gerçekleştirenlerin sonucunda ve biraz önce ifade etmiş olduğum o talan, tahribat,
the exploitation as a result of plunder, destruction and ignoring towards the human beings gave way to climate crisis, food crisis, and crisis in health, education, agriculture, and others. Living conditions became worse for everyone. World is becoming more and unlivable. Life conditions are worsening from all aspects. Less organization, lower wages, and inequalities among countries and classes had increased more and more. With 2007 crisis and other crises within all these areas which I had listed can be called collectively as the crisis of life. And as a result of this, humans cannot live as humans, animals as humans, plants as plants, insects as insects. As a result of this, we know the zoonoses, swine influenza, Zika, Ebola, created epidemics and also some disease factors, mostly hosted by bats, but also some other animals. SARS, MERS, and COVID-19 factors began to transmit from human to human and became deadly factors. World Health Organization, founded in 1948, declared first international public health emergency in 2009 for swine influenza. Look, only in 10 or 11 years, they had to declare the sixth of them in 2019, 20 January, COVID-19 pandemic. They had to declare this in order to coordinate the governments and the countries. Within this framework, I want to discuss the following. How can pandemic be coped with? Will it be enough to eradicate this pandemic? I think this can be a kind of key to discuss this. So, in a nutshell, patriarchal capitalist mode of society and its product, patriarchal neoliberal capitalism, should be seen as the root cause. And all the other areas where neoliberal capitalism made arrangements should be seen as the intermediary causes, and crises such as climate crisis, food crisis, crisis in systems, deepened inequalities, worsened conditions of life and work should be seen as collectively a consequence, a result under the name of crisis of life, which gave birth to COVID-19 pandemic. Within this scope, within this context, COVID-19 pandemic, which is a product of crisis of life, is to be discussed with regards to combating it. Yes, you see that nobody is fighting against it, but also COVID-19 pandemic created increase in diseases, deaths, inaccessibility of services, terror, unemployment, more disease risks, deprivations, increased poverty, discrimination, hunger, as we see in Turkey, increased states of violence, violation of democracy, restriction of freedom, and volunteer domination. All of these are being added on the top of the other crises and inequalities which already exist. When we take away COVID-19 pandemic, yes, we will not have this effect, but we know that as far as capitalism will exist, we will be experiencing similar things. Either COVID-19 pandemic will reiterate itself, will relapse, or we will be seeing new pandemics. What attracted our attentions in pandemic, why it is here? This is the last session of today, and actually of the program. After this, we will be discussing what is to be done. In order to make a summary, I can share these results. First, necessary efforts had not been put in order to prevent the contagion of the epidemic to the world. Yes, there was an epidemic in Wuhan, and the symptoms had been seen for the first time, but all the relations had continued as it was. And we can say that scientific knowledge and experience were not being drawn upon. Secondly, everyone and each country is impacted of pandemic, but in different levels. As I said, health systems, because it was transformed by neoliberalism, capitalism, was not ready and appropriate for combating epidemic. That's why the fight with pandemic was mostly in hospitals and treatment was prioritized over protection. Protection from disease and healing from disease had been individualized. Everyone used their own means. Capital became needy to the financial support of the state, and there were great discrimination in economic and social supports given by the government, and especially capitalists were prioritized. Because of the measures against pandemic gained a class character. Refugees became more and more excluded. The conflict between two basic classes had been deepened. It is tried to be covered in the daily politics, but it is visible and it will become more and more visible. The masks and vaccination, which are the most important two factors for protection against human, but they are still capitalized. Mask is the basic means of protection, and everybody has to pay it, which is completely irrational. Vaccination is still sold, and there are vaccination wars. This is a manifestation of the capital's identity as a simple murderer. Also, vaccination monopolies. SARS-CoV-2 is an RNA virus, and the vaccinations will have a risk, a very strong risk, that they will become ineffective for the new mutations, and this is completely ignored. The social prestige of scientific knowledge had increased. We can observe it in our country too. Science is being discussed. We have a scientific council at least. But unfortunately, not universities, but Turkish Medical Association was the most important factor. Of course, Turkish Medical Association is our honor and is representing us, but unfortunately, because the universities had to assume this role, and the reliability of scientific knowledge production had been sacrificed to the capital under the pretext of social benefits. Yes, unfortunately, in these processes, the vaccination processes had been terminated, and many vaccination could not enter in phase 4. In such an important issue, vaccine, and we know that disease is so dangerous and so deadly, but different people all over the world did not come together in order to develop a method altogether. And they had to use this for the social benefit collectively, but nothing could be done here. Unfortunately, we see that science and scientific community is in a very negative situation. Nation states are continuing to reinforce their existence based on pandemic. They are restricting freedoms, they are violating human rights and democracy. In Turkey's last 72 hours is an example for this. We can remember them as the black remnants of this, the black examples of this. Unfortunately, the authority of state is being sacrificed by means of doctors or the healthcare personnel. You know, generally on TV in Turkey, we see so-called experts coming to fore to legitimize imperialism and capitalism, but unfortunately, not all, of course, but the medical community and healthcare workers are creating a voluntary domination and causing a voluntary domination in all sectors of the society. Last two of them. Despite that it is an event affecting everyone and each country, the solution is sought in individual level and in nation-state level. I know this is a big assertion, but unfortunately, there is not a fight against pandemic. Still, they are trying to alleviate pandemic. They are not fighting it. And the case is like this, both in our country and throughout the world, thanks to the existing situation of neoliberal capitalism. After this, I'd like to share with you the inequalities in our country, which became more visible after pandemic.
Ve buna bağlı sınırlıklar sürüyor. Hala Sağlık Bakanlığı
Skewering and censorship is still continuing. Still, universities or independent researchers cannot make a research about the disease and about the mortality because still it is subject to the approval of the ministry. Because of their tasks in burial procedures, metropolitan municipalities and municipalities have death registries, and main opposition party have many 11 metropolitan municipalities and 10 provinces, but only after 8 months from the first death because of COVID-19, the municipalities began to express that the death toll is much bigger than the ministry. Later on, they didn't continue to this. It's not about, hey, there are many people dying. This is not something to be proud of. But if the society knows the level of the mortality, the public can be much more insistent in inspecting the government agencies and taking measures. We have to see this. I mentioned too. Sorry, it will be 27th November 2020, not 2021. I'm really sorry. And in Istanbul, using ecological research techniques, there were certain studies with the satellite views, cell phones, and ministry's application, so-called Hayat FSR, life can be sustained at home. Many studies have been made, and these dimensions could be shown. And also Birleşik Metal İş, trade union, a trade union of metal workers, in 16th November of 2020, they 7.3% of their workers had contracted COVID-19. And in the same time, according to Ministry of Health, the frequency of the disease for COVID-19 was 1.36, which means 5.4 times. Of course, it's not right what the ministry shared, but even if we accept it as right, there is more than 5 times difference in terms of contraction to the disease. Number of the occupational murders, which are called accidents, are 2,427 in 2020, and 30.5% of them, 741 persons, died of COVID-19. And yesterday, this figure was 840. This layouts and unemployment, layoffs and unemployment in COVID-19, it really increased, and monthly average loss of employment was 4,400,000. Employment decreased and active workers decreased with millions. These are information shared by DISC, another trade union confederation, and also many measures had been taken in order to support the bosses, such as short working fees, which had been given to more than 3.7 million people. We don't know what is the situation in undeclared work and informal work. And let me show you some differences and inequalities among regions and provinces in Turkey. These are inequalities caused by the government. The source of data for this study is the vaccination table of the Ministry of Health, which is published online on a provincial level. Of course, we could use the diseases, but in order to know the real level of the diseases, we need a widespread vaccination. And Ministry of Health and government is doing its best to find less patients and to give less shots of vaccination. So the vaccination table can be a data group which can be closest to the truth. That's why I use this. Total number of vaccination as of 15 March 2021, 2:12 p.m. was 11.39 million people. First shots had been given to around 8 million, 7,924,065, and second shot, which means full vaccination, around less than 3.5 million. What had been done, these three data group for the provinces and for whole Turkey, used on the population registry based on address. Let's see the percentage of vaccination in each province, the first doses, second doses, and for each province, 9 and for each province, we had calculated the first and 9th 10%, the percentiles, and then the provinces of 10% had been considered as a group, and the 9th 10% had been classified as a different group. I'll be sharing them with visuals. And the first 10% and last 10%, there is an equality, and this inequality had been measured by World Health Organization with the rate ratio, the difference between the best and the worst. And also, according to the economical region units, we know that Turkey is divided into 12 regions in recent 15 years, and we have looked at the total frequency of the vaccination, first dose shot, second shot, and differences among regions in order to see the best one and the worst one. That's why we had used the rate ratio, RR approach, and we also calculated how many of the unvaccinated could be vaccinated if there would be any equality, which is an hypothetical indicator, but still important in order to see the inequality. And this is called population attributable risk. 12 regions. Istanbul is a region in itself with more than 15 million population. Eastern Marmara, Western Black Sea, Eastern Black Sea, Central Anatolia, Central Eastern Anatolia, Northeastern Anatolia, and Mediterranean regions are these 12 regions. And total percentage is in Mediterranean region as of 15 March of 2020 was 21.99%. So 22 out of 100 people were vaccinated. But in Southeastern Anatolia, it is only 9.18 out of 100. And Turkey average is 13.63%. 14 out of 100 people are vaccinated. Difference between the Southeastern Anatolia and Mediterranean is 2.4 times. And if there would be an equality, that 32% of unvaccinated would have been vaccinated. As of the first dose, first shot, Mediterranean region is in the best situation. Southeastern Anatolia is in the worst situation. In Mediterranean, 15 out of 100 had first shot, and in southeastern Anatolia, only 6.5 out of 100 people received the first shot, and Turkish average is 9.5%. The difference between Mediterranean and southeastern Anatolia is 2.3 times, and population attributable risk is 31.96%, taking into consideration between two regions. If socioeconomical equalities had been abolished, more 32 would have been vaccinated among unvaccinated 100. And when we look at the full dose, including the second shot, Mediterranean is still in the best position. 7 out of 100 had been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and only 2.7 people outside of 100, and Turkish average is 4.15%. The difference is 2.58 times between Mediterranean and southeastern Anatolia. And if there had not been regional inequalities in Turkey, 34 out of 100 unvaccinated people would have been vaccinated. And let's have a look at the provinces on map. The first shot, Çanakkale is, sorry, this is the second shot. The best city is Çanakkale, the worst city is Siirt. In Çanakkale, 7.43% were vaccinated, and in Siirt, it's not even one person out of 100, 8 persons out of 1,000. But in Çanakkale, it's 74. In 10%, in the percentiles. When we look at the provinces which had 1.60% and less second shot, are these 8 provinces. Look. For the same second shot, when we look at the best situation, 9th percentile, 6.5 and higher percentage are vaccinated. When we look at these provinces, they are in the west, north, and they are not very close to one another. But there is not a clustering like that we see on the eastern part. In the same way, if the break value would be the first quartile, only 3.28% and less provinces. I think this map will make us all the question, what is the relation between the vaccination and the provinces where the mayors were replaced by so-called trustees by the central government? The difference between the worst and best, we have around 9.5% differences. At least 1.78 out of 100 people received the first dose, and 17 out of 100 received vaccination in Çanakkale. First 4%, the worst 10% is more or less the same series. Cities to the Kurdish cities in the southeastern side of Turkey. If we look at the best situation, the 9th percentile, we see that they are completely dispersed. If we look at the 25% as the first quartile, we see that Istanbul is added to the cities to the right, which means that the provinces which received 7.9% and less vaccination for the first dose, and we can add Istanbul to this too. When we look at the total vaccination, For the first percentile, the provinces with 5% and less would be the same with the provinces which I've shown. They are clustered here. When we look at the best ones, we see that they are quite dispersed. When we take 25%, as we see, it's in the eastern and southeastern Anatolia cities. We see the worst situation is in these provinces. We have a dilemma, or we have a crossroads. Either what we are living will go on or won't. We will be discussing this in the upcoming session. And thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you very much for your attention.
Çok teşekkürler Onur Hocam. Ağzınıza sağlık. Gerçekten.
Thank you, Professor Hamzaoğlu. Your presentation
Thank you very much.
Gave us much information, and you shared your analysis concerning Turkey. So in that sense, it was a very enlightening session. There are many messages of thanks in YouTube, also for the data that you shared. First, I would like to say that Dr. Navarro won't be able to join because of technical problems, but we will be here until 6:30. And we also told him, Dr. Navarro, that he can reach us before 6:30 if he can. Our apologies for this situation. Nihat Koçit asks, despite the vaccination rates in the risk map of the ministry, we see that the Southeast Anatolian region has the lowest risk due to the very low vaccination rates. And on the contrary, the Aegean and the Mediterranean regions have the highest vaccination rates. Does it have to do with anything economic, like because of the economic ties? So we would like to solve these issues with you if we can. Thank you very much, Mr. Nihat. Actually, I told you about the reasons why I work with what groups, as my colleagues say, all those persons interested in it, and let me be included in this, that there's supposedly this table of success, this picture of success, supposedly by the ministry. Therefore, the origination of the disease is being prevented, so to speak, through fewer number of tests and not many patients, thanks to fewer number of tests. So actually the inequalities over the patients, through the patients, the vaccination was opted for that, but then in the Southeast Anatolian region, the vaccination, the inoculation rates show how deep inequality is and the situation in the field is. So what we actually term the turquoise picture, unfortunately, I don't like this color for a long time because it has become an official color lately. So in that turquoise table where you can see some of the other regions, unfortunately, it does not reflect the reality because many data is contrary to that. Not enough tests are being conducted, and they insist on this. Aside from these, the evaluations concerning the regions are too early because the vaccination period is too early. Of course, some changes will occur and they will all settle down. So we shall see later and evaluate later because then it will be more meaningful. But of course, the prioritization of the Western regions in inoculation rates is due to the investments, wherever the investments, wherever the manufacturing and production, there is the shift of higher inoculation rates. So actually 11 million doses of vaccinations started with the 72nd day. So a significant majority is the health workers. Health workers inoculated one another. Actually, a society-wide inoculation, on the other hand, is not doing very well. It's coming from behind. I would like to underline this fact. Thank you very much. Nuray Tanır has a question. So showing lower rates will harm themselves and the people in the long run. Can't they see it? Well, they see us as fish memory, unfortunately. There's such an ugly situation in front of us. And we see this in many situations. They think, the government thinks that we will forget. But I guess that these won't be forgotten. All the things that they did these days won't be forgotten. At least the pain that the COVID-19 has created for us will be reflected in the field of health and won't be forgotten. Meltem Günbey, concerning voluntary subjection, has there been a change throughout this 1 year of pandemic? Yes, there has been a change. They were much more ruthless, reckless at the beginning. Especially the health workers, the doctors were careless, and there were those that were being on the side of the ruling power. And I'm talking about the mainstream media that was obstructing people's being informed. But as things were being revealed, they had to kind of reset their attitude. And of course, this organized attitude by the Turkish Medical Association actually eliminated this in time. But unfortunately, this organization was due to the politicization, especially going on in the universities. The ruling power was wreaking havoc in the universities. Therefore, the Turkish Medical Association had to organize well, politicize well, together with the civil structures and other related organizations. Thank you. Vedat Bulut's question. In the Southeast Anatolian region, how are the data of inoculations? I haven't reached data enough, and censor is so intense and institutional now. There is no such data concerning serosense. Neşe asks, 5 million refugees were not inoculated throughout the pandemic. Shall we not also talk about it? Yes, definitely. I actually refer to it, how victimized they were and invisible they were rendered. We have to underline that. They're the ones who are the victims. Everything is unregistered. Their lives are even unregistered. So as a committee, we have to especially deal with them, accepting them as a citizen of this country so that they can benefit from all the services on a public level. We need to do all our best, and we need to demand it at least. At least I can talk on my own behalf. Deniz Beydirli asked, what should the public do? What kind of precautions should it take? The public on the one side, they have to demand from the government what needs to be done. So concerning the factories, areas of manufacturing, they are still open, just as schools are still open, and mass transit is being used. And COVID-19's effects need to be taken on board in the regulation of all these areas. Of course, the demand for inoculation in that sense needs to continue. And of course, the dissemination of masks and vaccinations should be demanded still. And while these are being done, we shall, beginning with the tertiary and the fourth level health care, we should do our best as doctors and healthcare workers. But in order for us to be careful about distance, for instance, when we enter a bus or some other mass transit vehicle, it needs to be regulated in such a way that we do not have to get closer. Or similarly, in a factory, we shouldn't sit elbow to elbow. Similarly, in a bus, we shouldn't sit elbow to elbow. So through a public audit, these areas should be organized in a way that we do not come too close to one another. But the public assistance that was already cut are all being channeled to the bosses, to the CEOs. And unfortunately, such a reverse attitude is not in question. And the public is being blamed due to getting sick. Therefore, organizing, getting together, and demanding is what we need to do. So the schools are open, shall be opened, but in a way that all the necessary precautions are being employed. And this will be a beginning for us, actually. Thank you. Osman Öztürk shared a message. Remember, Atas Soyer was commemorated for his 8th year of death. Mehmet Zencir says that between June and November, the rates were very high. There were too many deaths per day. Unfortunately, the data was not shared enough, and we were talking as a committee, and we were talking about what to do, and if there's a lockdowns, then these tests should be done, we said. But unfortunately, they didn't do it the way we demanded in a disseminated manner, and they did not share the information, unfortunately, enough with the public. I also would like to ask a question that I'm really curious about. In the world today, there has been a bit more than 350 million vaccinations. The United States should be the first in the list of the highest rate of inoculations, and Turkey was the 6th, I guess. So there's around 500,000 to 600,000 doses can be done, and it can go all the way up to 1 million per day, actually. But in such a stagnating system, how could healthcare workers actually implement it? It all has to do with our connection with our profession and the nature of the people in this soil, in this land, and the social reality therein. There's no other explanation to that. Despite the system, despite all the problems, there are those health workers, all our colleagues that I'm commemorating with respect, that are losing their lives being next to the patients. It's not possible to see this in Europe, or the United States is always being mentioned anyways. I guess we need to also underline the necessity of regulation of the healthcare environment, that COVID-19 shall be accepted as a professional occupational disease. And we underlined how compulsory it should be, but that concerning these, I guess we haven't done well, unfortunately, just as we didn't do well in the area of education with the schools. So maybe we should focus on these areas. Actually, if Dr. Navarro was here, the session would not come to an end. in terms of speaking with you in an extended manner, this was a good opportunity to be one-on-one. Actually, I would like to say that the data that you shared about Turkey and the presentation received many thanks. So, concerning the optimism of vaccination, what do you think? Accessibility, apologies, because there is this situation with accessibility like this. As you know, the patriarchal neoliberal capitalism imposes and this inhumane regulation in the world. Throughout several months, it is possible to manufacture enough vaccinations for all the people in the world. We know about this, that all people in the world can be inoculated. But there were no decisions then, and 70% of the vaccinations were bought by several countries, bought in quotation marks. They were purchased by these countries. So such a stigmatization situation cannot be accepted concerning accessibility versus inaccessibility. So what we see today is that being rich, having money, has created a hegemony among countries. It is being revealed well, I guess, in this period, and we need to underline it again. Dr. Hamzaoğlu, thank you very much. You have been very exhausted, but it has been a very enlightening, a very fun session. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Actually, I would like to thank you. I and dear Ms. Özlem Kurt have worked together in Society and Doctor Physician Journal. She used to come to us. We used to prepare folders in the chamber of Turkish Medical Association, and we tried to work on the infections because I'm more on the infection side. I would like to thank Dr. Özlem Kurt Azap for that. I would like to thank you very much for all this, for creating such a nice session. I would like to thank Barış Yıldırım, Osman İşçi, and Müge Atala, the interpreters. I'm very astonished to see how they're so well prepared and how they can transmit the emotions, the senses. Many thanks to Çağlar from the Turkish Medical Association, Antep Chamber, the technical team, and Onur Naci Karahancı. Many thanks to Onur Naci Karahancı. So we will meet in the next session at 7. What to do, how to do. Thank you very much. My respect to all those who labored in the realization of this program. Thank you.